"I'll marry you when I grow up," said the little girl to the Mafia boss. 15 years later, she returned and a storm, an alley. A little girl promises a bleeding stranger she'll marry him when she grows up. He lives. He remembers. Now she's back. No names, no lies, just the same pink ribbon and the same man. Only he's the king everyone fears. He says she's under his protection. The city says she's the bait. A bullet cracks their window. A note calls her the little bride. A polished lawyer smiles too sweet. Fake money trails point to her lab. Long lens photos twist the past into something dirty. Then, midnight, a chapel, wires under the pews, and a live camera waiting for a fall. He'll burn a kingdom to keep her breathing. But who set this trap, and will that childhood vow save them, or become the one promise that gets them both killed? The rain hammered against the pavement, turning the narrow city alley into a maze of puddles and shadows. 8-year-old Tessa Hart pressed herself further behind the rusting trash cans, her small hands trembling as she hugged her knees to her chest. The sound of heavy footsteps splashing through water made her hold her breath. A figure staggered into view, a young man, barely out of his teens, with blood dripping from his clenched fists. His dark hair was plastered to his face, and even in the dim light, Tessa could see the tension in his jaw as he moved with the careful precision of someone in pain. A gun hung loose in his grip, catching the faint glow of distant streetlights. Something about him made her pause. Despite his wounds and the weapon, she didn't feel afraid. Instead, she saw someone hurting, just like when her friend Tommy fell off his bike last week. Before she could think better of it, Tessa stepped out from her hiding spot. The young man, Dorian Vale, spun around, his gun half raised before he registered her size. His eyes, sharp and alert despite his condition, widened slightly at the sight of a little girl in rainbow pajamas and rubber boots. "You're bleeding," Tessa said matter-of-factly, reaching into her pocket. She always carried Band-Aids, pink ones with little hearts on them. Her dad said she had a habit of trying to fix everything broken. Dorian remained perfectly still as she approached, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something softer that he quickly tried to hide. "You shouldn't be out here, little girl. Neither should you," she replied, carefully peeling open the bandage. "You're hurt." His laugh was rough, barely more than a breath. "That's not something a Band-Aid can fix." But he didn't pull away when she reached for his hand, her small fingers careful as she pressed the pink bandage over the worst of the cuts across his knuckles. The rain made it difficult, but she'd had practice with Tommy's scrapes. "There," she declared proudly. "When I grow up, I'll marry you and fix all your hurts." The words, spoken with such innocent conviction, seemed to strike something deep within him. For a moment, the hardness in his face cracked, revealing a wry, pained smile that transformed his entire appearance. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. "Be brave, little one," he murmured, reaching into his pocket with his uninjured hand. He pulled out a length of ribbon, deep crimson in color, already marked with spots of his blood. With careful movements, he tied it around his wrist. In the distance, sirens began to wail, their sound cutting through the drumming rain. Dorian's expression immediately shifted back to alertness, all softness vanishing behind a mask of necessity. "Go home," he ordered, already backing away into the shadows. "Stay safe." Before disappearing completely, he slipped the ribbon from his wrist and tossed it to her. Tessa caught it instinctively, the silk warm from his skin despite the cold rain. The patrol car's lights painted the wet walls in alternating red and blue, but when they arrived moments later, the alley held nothing but a little girl clutching a blood-stained ribbon. The officers, finding her alone, escorted her back to her worried father with stern warnings about wandering out at night. Later, tucked into her bed, with the ribbon hidden safely under her pillow, Tessa listened to the storm rage outside her window. The old clock on her bedside table ticked steadily toward midnight, its rhythm matching her heartbeat as she made herself a solemn promise. "I'll find you again," she whispered to the darkness, her fingers tracing the dried blood on the silk. The rain rattled against her window, nature's applause to her vow. "When I'm older, I'll find you." The clock continued its steady count, marking each second that passed, each moment that carried her further from their chance encounter and closer to their eventual reunion. She held onto the ribbon tighter, the small piece of him that proved he wasn't just a figment of her imagination. The storm outside seemed to echo the tumult of emotions in her young heart: determination, curiosity, and something she was too young to name. Lightning occasionally illuminated her room, casting brief, stark shadows that made the ribbon in her hands glow like fresh blood. She thought about his smile, how it had changed his whole face, how the hardness in his eyes had softened for just a moment when she'd tended to his wound. Even at 8, Tessa understood she'd witnessed something rare and precious, a glimpse of truth behind a carefully constructed facade. The pink band-aid she'd given him seemed such a small thing against whatever darkness had brought him to that alley, but she remembered how he'd allowed her to help, how despite his obvious pain and the danger he was in, he'd shown kindness to a little girl hiding behind trash cans. Thunder rolled overhead, a low growl that seemed to shake the foundations of her house. Tessa pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders, but not from fear. The storm felt like a lullaby now, a wild song promising adventures to come. The ribbon smelled faintly of copper and rain, and something else, perhaps cologne or leather, that she would remember for years to come. She carefully folded it and slipped it into her special box, the one where she kept her most important treasures. A shell from her only trip to the beach, a perfect autumn leaf, and now this, a promise written in blood and silk. The clock's hands finally met at midnight, marking the end of this extraordinary night. But for Tessa, it felt more like a beginning. She closed her eyes, the rhythm of the rain and the steady ticking of the clock blending together into a gentle percussion that eventually lulled her towards sleep, the memory of his wry smile and gentle words following her into her dreams. The ocean breeze carried salt and memories as Tessa crossed the marble steps of the Hamilton Museum of Fine Arts. 15 years had transformed the city's waterfront into gleaming towers and artisan boutiques, but she could still taste that rainy night on her tongue. Her sensible heels clicked against the polished floor as she entered the gala, her black cocktail dress a calculated choice between professional and elegant. The travel fatigue from her cross-country flight clung to her bones. She'd barely had time to check into the Hotel Maritime and change before rushing to the unveiling. Her father's estate could wait until morning. Tonight was about securing her position as the museum's temporary restoration specialist. Crystal champagne flutes clinked amid the murmur of wealthy patrons discussing the private collection. Tessa accepted a glass from a passing waiter, using it more as a prop than a drink. She needed her wits about her tonight. The unveiled paintings lined the gallery's east wall, each piece dramatically lit. She moved methodically through the collection, noting condition issues with her practiced eye, until her champagne nearly slipped from suddenly numb fingers. The canvas before her captured a familiar alley from above, as if the artist had perched on a fire escape that Tessa knew had never existed. Rain-slicked cobblestones gleamed under streetlights, and there, behind scattered trash cans, a tiny figure huddled. Her throat tightened. She knew that pink coat, that tangled hair. Magnificent piece, isn't it? The deep voice behind her sent a shiver down her spine. She turned to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored black suit studying her with dark, knowing eyes. His features were sharp, aristocratic, but it was his presence that commanded attention. Dangerous grace contained in elegant lines. "The perspective is impossible," Tessa managed, her art historian's vocabulary deserting her. "Perhaps." His smile held secrets. But sometimes the impossible moments are the ones worth preserving. She watched him signal to the curator with a slight nod. The painting was sold instantly, no discussion of price required. The ease of the transaction spoke of considerable influence. "You didn't even examine it closely," she observed, proud that her voice remained steady. "I don't need to." He turned those intense eyes back to her. "I've been looking for this particular piece for a very long time." The curator hurried over, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Vale, your usual courier service?" Vale. The name hit her like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step back, memories flooding in. Blood on knuckles, a wry smile, a crimson ribbon. "No need." His voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "My word is sufficient." "Of course, sir. We'll have it prepared for delivery immediately." Tessa felt his attention return to her like a tangible weight. "Miss Hart," she supplied. "Tessa Hart. I'm the new restoration specialist." "Temporary position, I understand?" He spoke as if he already knew every detail of her contract. 6 months. She lifted her chin slightly. "The Hamilton has some pieces requiring specialized attention." "Indeed." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps, or appreciation for her professional mask. "Welcome back to the city, Miss Hart." The way he emphasized back confirmed her suspicions. He remembered, too. Their conversation danced through pleasantries, each word laden with unspoken meaning. He spoke of the city's changes, she commented on the collection's provenance. But beneath the social niceties, electricity crackled. The gala's closing was announced, and Tessa made her excuses. The night air outside helped clear her head, but her pulse still raced. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk as she contemplated calling a ride. A sleek black car pulled up beside her, silent as a predator. The rear door opened, and there he sat, backlit by the interior lights. Between his fingers dangled a length of familiar ribbon, no longer stained with blood, but unmistakably the same one she'd kept hidden away for 15 years. "Would you like some answers, Miss Hart?" The ribbon caught the streetlight, shimmering like a promise, or a threat. The sea breeze tugged at her hair, carrying the distant sound of waves and the weight of choices. He held her gaze, patient and intent, as if he'd waited 15 years for precisely this moment. The ribbon swayed gently between them, a bridge between past and present, between the little girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. The car's interior looked like butter-soft leather and old money. Music played softly, classical, something with strings that she couldn't quite place. His suit jacket had fallen open, revealing a gun holster that he made no attempt to hide. A statement, perhaps, or a warning. Tessa's practical side screamed about getting into cars with strange men, especially ones she'd last seen bleeding in an alley. But her fingertips tingled with the memory of pressing that pink bandage to his wound, of his smile breaking through pain like sunshine through storm, clouds. The streetlight above flickered, casting alternating patterns of light and shadow across his features. In those shifting illuminations, she caught glimpses of both versions of him, the wounded young enforcer and this polished, dangerous man. The ribbon twisted slowly in the evening breeze, hypnotic as a pendulum. She could walk away, call a taxi, return to her hotel room, and pretend this evening was nothing but travel exhaustion and champagne. Her temporary contract didn't require entanglement with mysterious art buyers who carried guns and memories. But the answers she'd craved for 15 years waited in that car. The truth about that night, about the painting's impossible angle, about his presence in her city now. All she had to do was step forward, cross that threshold between safety and uncertainty. The car glided through rain-slicked streets, city lights bleeding across tinted windows. Tessa sat with her spine straight, hands folded in her lap, watching the man who'd haunted her memories for 15 years. "Dorian Vale," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority she remembered. "Though you knew me first as the bleeding stranger in that alley, I wasn't sure you'd remember." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. A child offering kindness when I least deserved it. His smile held a shadow of that long-ago pain. "Some moments mark us permanently." He reached into his suit jacket, movements deliberately slow, and withdrew a tablet. "Speaking of marking moments, this was taken 3 hours ago." The security footage showed Tessa collecting her luggage at the airport. A man in a nondescript jacket lingered too close, his attention fixed on her, while pretending to check his phone. "Here." Dorian swiped to another clip, the same man outside her hotel, now wearing different clothes. And again at the gala, though he stayed by the service entrance. Cold settled in her stomach. "Who is he?" "That's what concerns me." Dorian's expression hardened. "Your father's estate settlement brought you back at an interesting time. There are people who might think you have access to certain information." "My father was an insurance adjuster," she protested, "who died in a car accident that left very few answers." His tone suggested he knew more than he was saying. "The timing is suspicious." The car turned onto a private drive, leading to a gleaming tower that pierced the night sky. Dorian's building, she realized. She'd seen it featured in architecture magazines. "You'll be safer here while I investigate who's showing such keen interest in your return." It wasn't a request. "I have a hotel room, which they know about." He met her gaze directly. "I protect what's mine, Tessa. You made me a promise in that alley." Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I was 8. And yet here we are." His smile held equal parts warmth and warning. Fate has interesting ways of collecting. The elevator ride to the penthouse levels was silent, tension crackling between them. The doors opened to reveal a stunning great room with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the cityscape. Modern furnishings in deep blues and grays created an atmosphere of understated luxury. Dorian produced a key card in a small velvet box. "The card accesses only my private floors." The box. "Well, I thought you might want this back." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The pink ribbon lay coiled inside, cleaned of blood, but unmistakable. Memories flooded back. The metallic scent of blood, his pained breath, the way he'd smiled, despite everything. "I don't need protection," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. He moved to the windows, beckoning her closer. The silver sedan, it's passed 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Tessa followed his gaze to the street below. The car he indicated crawled past, its driver's face hidden in shadow. Her pulse quickened. Your father's death left loose ends, Dorian continued. Someone thinks you might help tie them up. And you're offering shelter out of, what, childhood nostalgia? His reflection in the glass showed a dangerous smile. Let's say I honor my debts. That bandage bought me time I desperately needed. So now you're repaying by basically imprisoning me? Protecting, he corrected. There's a difference. She hugged herself, watching the city lights sparkle like scattered diamonds. The clock on a nearby building showed 11:00 p.m. in stark LED numbers. Here she stood, effectively locked in a mobster's penthouse, while the man she'd once promised to marry commanded both the skyline and her immediate future. Dorian's presence behind her radiated heat and implicit threat. Not to her, she somehow knew, but to anyone who might wish her harm. The silver car made another pass below, a reminder that danger circled like a shark in shallow waters. The guest suite is through there, he indicated a hallway. Everything you need has been provided. We'll discuss more in the morning. Tessa's fingers closed around the velvet box, feeling the weight of the ribbon inside. Part of her wanted to refuse his protection, to assert her independence. But the security footage played in her mind. The stalker's patient surveillance, the calculated way he'd tracked her movements. The penthouse windows offered a panoramic view of the city she'd left behind years ago. Now she was back, ensnared in whatever web had caught her father. The girl who'd hidden behind trash cans was gone, replaced by a woman who restored damaged art and understood the value of preservation. Dorian moved with liquid grace to pour 2 fingers of amber liquid into crystal glasses. He offered one to her, his fingers brushing hers, in a touch that sent electricity racing up her arm. 2 returned promises, he said softly. The whiskey burned sweet and smooth on her tongue. Below, the silver car finally pulled away, but its absence felt more like a temporary retreat than a departure. She was safer. Here, despite the golden cage aspects of her situation, Dorian watched her with hooded eyes that held memories of blood and bandages, of childish vows and rain-soaked alleys. The skyline glittered beyond the glass, his reflection overlaying the city lights like he owned them all. Perhaps he did. The ribbon in its velvet box felt heavy with possibility. She'd wanted answers about that night for 15 years. Now those answers stood beside her, dangerous and compelling, while unknown threats circled below. The clock ticked past 11:15. Tessa remained at the window, city lights painting patterns across her face, aware that her life had irrevocably shifted. The girl who'd offered a pink bandage had set this moment in motion. The woman she'd become would have to navigate its consequences. Tessa's bare feet made no sound on the cool marble floor as she wandered the penthouse's vast expanse. The delivery team's efficient movements drew her attention to the service elevator, where they carefully maneuvered the alley portrait alongside her wheeled suitcase. Dorian's presence commanded the space as he reviewed the delivery manifest. His signature was precise, unhurried, but something in his posture shifted as he glanced toward the street below. Check the surrounding rooftops, he ordered his men, voice cutting through the quiet like steel. The first crack split the air like thunder, glass spiderwebbed in an intricate pattern of destruction. Before Tessa could process what was happening, Dorian's body slammed into hers, driving them both behind the kitchen's marble island. His weight pressed her into the floor, shielding her as more shots rang out. Stay down, he commanded, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other reached for his weapon. From somewhere near the windows, Pyotr Novak moved with military precision. The security chief's suppressive fire was controlled, methodical, 3-round bursts that spoke of professional training. Brass casings pinged against marble floors, while safety glass continued to crack and fall in crystalline cascades. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. Dorian's cologne mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder, his body still protectively curved over hers. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the distant wail of sirens. Clear! Pyotr called out, his voice tight with controlled tension. Dorian eased back slightly but kept one hand on Tessa's shoulder. Status? No casualties, they're gone. Pyotr moved toward the balcony, weapon still at ready. But they left something. A single sheet of paper, weighted down by a bullet, fluttered in the night breeze. Pyotr retrieved it with gloved hands, passing it to Dorian. 3 words were written in elegant script. To the little bride! The muscle in Dorian's jaw ticked as he reached into his jacket, withdrawing a worn scrap of paper. This was taken from your father's office. Found it during my preliminary investigation. He handed her what appeared to be a torn corner from an accounting ledger, the numbers and notations familiar from her childhood memories of her father's work. Tessa's fingers trembled as she traced the familiar handwriting. They know about that night, about the alley. They know too much. Dorian's voice was glacier cold. He helped her to her feet, one arm still protectively curved around her waist. Piotr, get the emergency protocols in place. I want the security feed from every building with line of sight to these windows. Teams of men moved with practiced efficiency, applying red emergency film over the damaged glass panes. The transparent material cast a bloody tinge across the room, transforming the city lights into crimson stars. Tessa hugged herself, fighting a shiver as she watched the clock edge past midnight. The LED display seemed to mock her with its steady progression. 12:37, 12:38, 12:39. We're moving you before dawn, Dorian stated, his tone brooking no argument. They'll expect us to stay here, fortify our position. It's what I would do, which means it's exactly what we won't do. Where? Tessa asked, noting how his security teams had taken up defensive positions throughout the penthouse. I have a private club. The upper floors are secure, unknown to most. We'll extract quietly, avoid their predicted second strike. He touched her elbow gently, steering her away from the windows. Piotr, I want rotating patrols, random patterns. Make it look like we're digging in for a siege. The security chief nodded, already coordinating through his earpiece. Outside, emergency crews were beginning to arrive, their lights casting additional red pulses through the filmed windows. The clock hit 12:40 a.m. as Dorian led Tessa toward the interior rooms. Your father's ledgers, he said quietly. Did you ever notice anything unusual? Any patterns in the numbers? She thought of long afternoons in her father's study, the neat rows of figures that had always seemed somehow off. I restored art, not accounting records, but... She paused, remembering. There were inconsistencies, small ones. He would get angry if I asked about them. Dorian's expression hardened. Those inconsistencies got him killed, and now someone thinks you might have inherited more than just his estate. The red emergency film cast everything in a bloody wash, transforming the luxurious penthouse into something otherworldly. Security teams moved like shadows through the crimson light, weapons at ready. The alley portrait, hastily moved to an interior wall, seemed to watch them with painted eyes that held too many secrets. Pack light, Dorian instructed, guiding her toward the guest suite. Only what you can carry easily. We move in 3 hours. Tessa glanced back at the spider-webbed glass, at the city beyond that now seemed filled with hidden threats. The note lay on the counter where Dorian had placed it, those 3 words mocking her with their elegant script, to the little bride, a reference to a child's promise made in rain and blood, now turned deadly. The clock's red numbers continued their relentless march toward dawn. Security teams communicated in hushed tones, coordinating their deception while preparing for the real evacuation. Dorian stayed close, his presence both reassuring and unsettling as he directed his men with quiet authority. Through the filmed windows, the city glowed like an ember. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, using her childhood promise as a weapon. The ledger scrap in her hand felt heavy with unspoken threats, her father's neat figures holding secrets worth killing for. Piotr appeared at Dorian's shoulder, murmuring something too low for Tessa to hear. The security chief's expression was grim as he handed over a tablet displaying various camera feeds. Dorian studied them intently, his free hand unconsciously moving to rest at the small of Tessa's back. Protective, possessive, a silent promise of safekeeping. The SUV's tinted windows turned the city into a dark kaleidoscope as they wound through narrow side streets at 1:15 a.m. Tessa sat between Dorian and Piotr, her small overnight bag clutched in her lap. 2 identical vehicles flanked them, decoys, she realized, watching them peel off in different directions. Their car slowed beside an unmarked brick building, its facade distinguished only by a subtle brass plate. Dorian's hand found the small of her back as he guided her through a service entrance and up a narrow stairwell. His touch was firm but careful, like he was handling something precious but not fragile. The loft above the club unfolded in understated luxury, polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Ship's lights winked in the distance, peaceful despite the night's violence. Soundproofed, Dorian explained, engaging multiple locks on a reinforced door. The club noise won't reach us here. He moved through the space with familiar ease, activating security panels and checking sightlines. Kitchen's stocked. Bedroom's through there. Bathroom has everything you might need. Tessa set her bag down, taking in the space that would be her gilded cage. The rules? No exits without security. Burner phone only. Yours is compromised. He placed a basic flip phone on the kitchen counter. I have people analyzing that ledger fragment. We'll find the connection. She nodded, throat tight. And in the meantime? Dorian withdrew a compact pistol from a hidden wall safe. First, you learn to protect yourself. He demonstrated the weapon's mechanics with practiced precision, magazine release, slide lock, safety. His hands moved with surgical grace as he field-stripped the gun, explaining each component. When he reassembled it, he stood behind her, guiding her fingers through the motions. Rack the slide like this, he murmured, his chest warm against her back. Feel the resistance? That's normal. Now clearing. Her hands trembled slightly on the unfamiliar metal. Dorian's right hand covered hers, and she noticed the old scars across his knuckles, remnants of that rainy night 15 years ago. Your breathing's uneven, she said softly. It's affecting your aim. She could feel the minute tremors in his scarred hand. Without thinking, she pressed back against him, establishing a rhythm. Breathe with me. In, out. The air grew thick between them as their breaths synchronized. His free hand settled on her hip, steadying them both. The contact sparked something electric, something that had nothing to do with weapons training. Better? She whispered, hyper-aware of his proximity, the subtle cologne at his collar, the strength contained in his careful touch. Dorian cleared his throat, stepping back just enough to break the spell. You're a quick study. His voice held a rougher edge than before. Tessa set the pistol down, turning to face him. The painting from the gala. You commissioned it. Why? He moved to the windows, staring out at the harbor lights. I commission many pieces, some to launder money, yes, but others... He paused. Some truths are safer trapped in oil and canvas. The alley? A memory I needed to preserve. The night a little girl with a pink bandage reminded me I was human. The confession hung between them, heavy with unspoken weight. Tessa stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his stance. You kept the ribbon all these years. It was a talisman of sorts, a reminder that kindness exists, even in the darkest places. He checked his watch. 3:27 a.m. I have a meeting downstairs. Piotr will be outside. Try to rest. But rest was impossible. After Dorian left, Tessa paced the loft like a caged tiger. The harbor lights beckoned, but her mind raced with questions about her father's ledgers, about the shot that had shattered Dorian's window, about the childhood promise that had somehow become a threat. At 3:30 a.m., voices drifted up from below. She eased the loft door open a crack, straining to hear. Piotr stood at the bottom of the stairs, his back to her, as he guarded the approach. Museum board's been compromised, a man's voice filtered up. Martinelli family's got 3 trustees in their pocket. Track the donations, Dorian's voice commanded. Every piece they've acquired in the last 5 years. Hart's ledgers weren't just cooking numbers, they were coding provenance. Tessa's breath caught. The Martinelli name sparked recognition. A rival family, if the gossip at the gala had been accurate. She pressed closer to the gap, heart pounding as more names emerged. Each one connected to the museum, each one a potential thread in whatever web had entangled her father. The conversation shifted to logistics. Security rotations, surveillance feeds, contingency plans. Tessa stayed frozen at her listening post, absorbing every detail. Her father's careful columns of numbers took on new meaning. Not just accounting, but a cipher. Not just art restoration, but a cover for something darker. The harbor lights continued their silent dance beyond the windows. In the loft above, a club filled with secrets. A woman who had once been a child with a pink bandage pieced together the puzzle of why someone wanted her dead. The pistol Dorian had taught her to use lay cool and waiting on the kitchen counter, a reminder that some lessons couldn't wait for dawn. 3 stories below, men who traded in power and blood discussed art acquisitions like moves on a chessboard. And in the space between, Tessa held her breath and listened, understanding finally blooming like blood and water. Her father's legacy was far more complicated than a modest estate and a stack of ledgers. It was a key to something that made powerful men nervous enough to start shooting. The bank's polished marble floors echoed under Tessa's tired steps. 4 hours of fitful sleep hadn't dulled the urgency driving her here at 7:40 a.m., accompanied by Marco, one of Dorian's men who'd maintained a careful 3-step distance since they left the loft. "I'll need privacy in the viewing room," she told the bank manager, who nodded with practiced courtesy. Her father's safe deposit box held the expected papers, deed copies, insurance policies, certificates. But nestled beneath them sat a matte black thumb drive, unmarked except for a tiny restoration code her father used in his conservation work. Her hands trembled slightly as she slipped it into her bag. "All set?" Marco asked when she emerged. His eyes swept the lobby before guiding her to the waiting car. Back in the loft by 9:10 a.m., Tessa's restoration laptop hummed to life. The drive's encryption yielded to her father's favorite password pattern, a combination of pigment formulas and dates. What loaded onto her screen stole her breath. Donor spreadsheets, transfer logs, names and numbers that painted a darker picture with each scroll. The museum's acquisition records were a carefully constructed facade, laundering money for Benedetto Corsini's syndicate through inflated art sales and phantom restoration costs. "Oh, Dad," she whispered. "What did you get mixed up in?" A familiar name jumped out. Helena Ward, the elegant lawyer she'd spotted at the gala, exchanging quiet words with Dorian. The same Helena Ward who'd helped her father with what he'd called a minor tax matter last year. Tessa's stomach clenched. She remembered Helena's perfectly manicured nails, her coolly professional smile as she'd handled the paperwork. Had that been surveillance? A way to monitor how much her father might reveal? She dug deeper into the files, tracking Helena's appearances across multiple transactions. The lawyer's name, threaded through everything like a poisonous vine, connecting legitimate museum business to shadowy overseas accounts. When Dorian returned at 10 a.m., Tessa noticed it immediately. A dark smear at his French cuff, partially hidden by his suit jacket. Blood. "Productive morning?" he asked, shrugging off his jacket. The movement was fluid but careful, suggesting hidden bruises. "Whose blood is that?" She nodded at his sleeve. His expression hardened. Someone who needed reminding about loyalty. He disappeared into the bathroom, emerging minutes later in a fresh shirt. Tessa watched him pour coffee, noting the fresh scrapes across his knuckles. The same hands that had guided her through weapon handling hours ago had clearly been dealing out violence. The contrast should have frightened her. Instead, it made her pulse quicken in a way she wasn't ready to examine. She turned back to her laptop, double-checking the patterns she'd found. Everything pointed to Helena operating as a bridge between legitimate business and Corsini's interests. The lawyer's fingerprints were all over her father's final dealings. "We need to talk about Helena Ward," she said at 11:15 a.m., proud of how steady she kept her voice. Dorian stilled. "What about her?" "She's in my father's files, extensively. The same Helena who handled his tax issue last year, who I saw you speaking with at the gala. She's been moving money for Corsini through the museum for years." The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Dorian's expression darkened. He set down his coffee with deliberate care. "Show me." Tessa turned the laptop, watching as he absorbed the evidence. His jaw tightened with each scroll, each damning connection. "I'll start an internal audit," he said finally, "compartmentalized. Need to know only." "Shouldn't we?" "No." His tone left no room for argument. "Helena stays close until I'm certain of her role. If she's working both sides, I need to know who else is compromised." "She helped my father," Tessa pressed. "Was that surveillance, most likely?" Dorian's fingers traced the edge of her laptop. "The question is whether she was watching him for me or for Corsini." The harbor view beyond the windows had turned hazy, the morning sun fighting through marine layer. Tessa hugged herself, suddenly cold despite the loft's perfect temperature. "I could have accessed these files months ago, when he first died. If I had..." "You'd have made yourself a target sooner." Dorian moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring, despite the violence she knew his hands could deliver. "The timing worked out. You're here now, protected." Protected. The word carried weight, like the blood on his cuff and the gun he'd taught her to use, like the childhood promise that had somehow tangled them both in this web of art and money and power. The laptop screen glowed with Helena's name, a beacon pointing to deeper betrayals. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the currents of loyalty and danger flowing beneath its surface. In the loft above Dorian's club, surrounded by his security and his secrets, Tessa finally understood what her father's legacy truly meant. Not just ledgers and art, but a key to something worth killing for. The clock ticked toward noon, each moment drawing them closer to whatever truth Helena's dual roles would reveal. Dorian's promise to keep the lawyer close felt like a snake being allowed to coil near vital organs. But his expression held the same controlled fury she'd glimpsed in the alley 15 years ago. A wounded enforcer who'd found the will to keep moving, to survive, to build an empire. Now that empire faced a threat from within, and Tessa's discovery had lit the fuse. She watched Dorian make quiet phone calls, setting the audit in motion while maintaining Helena's access. A dangerous game, but one he seemed born to play. The morning sun finally burned through the marine layer, throwing harsh light across the loft's polished floors. In that illumination, nothing could hide. Not the fresh violence on Dorian's knuckles, not the exhaustion in Tessa's eyes, not the growing certainty that Helena's betrayal was just the beginning. The warehouse alert lit up Dorian's phone at 4 p.m., breaking the tense quiet that had settled since the Helena revelation. His expression shifted to something cold and focused. "You're coming with me," he said, already moving. "Safer inside my perimeter than anywhere else right now." The SUV rolled through industrial blocks, past shipping containers and chain-link fences. Tessa's heart hammered as they approached a nondescript warehouse. Armed men melted from shadows, acknowledging Dorian with sharp nods. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice low, "no matter what happens." Inside, the warehouse air hung thick with tension. Footsteps echoed off concrete and steel. A crash somewhere ahead made Tessa flinch. Dorian moved like liquid shadow, gun appearing in his hand as naturally as breathing. 3 men burst from behind a stack of crates, weapons raised. What happened next burned into Tessa's memory with horrible clarity. He was beautiful in his violence, each movement precise, calculated, deadly. The first attacker's gun went flying with a crack of bone. The second dropped from a perfectly placed strike to the throat. The third managed to fire, the shot going wide, before Dorian had him pinned, arm twisted at an unnatural angle. "Who sent you?" Dorian's voice carried quiet menace. The man spat blood. "Go to hell!" "After you." Dorian applied pressure until something popped. The man screamed. Tessa pressed herself against a container, pulse racing. This was the other side of him, the darkness she'd glimpsed in that childhood alley, now fully unleashed. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt safe, protected. The violence wasn't for her, it was for anyone who would harm her. More of Dorian's men swept the warehouse, securing the scene. One of them, young with close-cropped hair, took a hit that wrenched his shoulder out of socket. "Marcus." Dorian's tone shifted completely as he approached the injured man. Deep breath. His hands, deadly moments. Before, moved with gentle precision as he repositioned the joint. A sharp movement, a pained grunt, and the shoulder slipped back into place. "Sarah," he called, and a medic hurried over. "Take care of him. Good work today." The contrast struck Tessa hard. This man who could break bones one moment and heal them the next, who remembered names and showed genuine concern for his people while remaining utterly merciless to his enemies. By 5:30 p.m., they were back in the SUV, the warehouse scene secured and intelligence gathered. The enclosed space hummed with unspoken tension. Tessa could feel the residual energy rolling off him, barely contained power and carefully banked violence. "You're not afraid," he observed, studying her. "Should I be?" "Most would be after seeing that side of me." Tessa met his gaze steadily. "I saw both sides, the violence and the care afterward. They're both you." Something shifted in his expression. "That night in the alley," he said quietly, "your promise, it stayed with me through years when softness was a death sentence. Prison, street wars, building this." He gestured at the city beyond the tinted windows. "I never allowed myself to be gentle with anyone else." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Tessa remembered the young enforcer's pained smile, the way he'd looked at her bandage like it was something precious. "And now?" she asked. "Now you're here again, still offering bandages, still seeing more than the monster." They arrived back at the club at 6 p.m., taking the private elevator to the loft. Tessa's skin felt too tight, every nerve aware of his proximity. The bathroom light spilled soft gold across polished surfaces as she washed warehouse dust from her hands. Dorian appeared in the doorway, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to expose corded forearms. Their eyes met in the mirror. "We should talk about this," she said. "About what?" "The way you look at me, the way I look at you. Pretending there's nothing here is a lie," he finished, closing the distance between them. His fingers circled her wrist, exactly where the pink ribbon had rested 15 years ago. Time seemed to slow as he lifted her hand, maintaining eye contact as he pressed his lips to her pulse point. The kiss was gentle, deliberate, charged with promise. Tessa's breath caught, but she didn't pull away, couldn't pull away. "A lie," she agreed softly, watching his reflection, feeling the press of his mouth against her skin at 6:10 p.m., knowing this moment would change everything. The bathroom light caught the angles of his face, softening them. His other hand came up to cradle her wrist, thumbs stroking over delicate veins, handling her with the same care he'd shown his injured soldier. But there was heat there, too, barely leashed, like the violence she'd witnessed. Passion held in careful check. They stood frozen in that golden moment, neither willing to break the spell first. His lips lingered on her wrist, and Tessa could feel his breath, his pulse, the way his control wavered when she swayed slightly closer. Everything that had happened, the gala, the attacks, the warehouse, had led them here, to this quiet acknowledgement that the chemistry between them couldn't be denied, wouldn't be denied. The city lights were starting to flicker on outside, casting long shadows through the loft windows. But here, in this private space, with his mouth pressed to her wrist and her heart thundering against her ribs, time seemed to stand still. They had stepped over some invisible line, admitted something that couldn't be taken back. The pretense of professional distance, of ignoring the electric current that sparked between them, had crumbled like the warehouse walls that had witnessed his duality. Destroyer and protector, violence and tenderness, darkness and light. The city's pulse throbbed beneath the loft windows as night settled over the harbor. At 9 p.m., the club's bass line vibrated through the floorboards, a distant heartbeat matching Tessa's own racing pulse. She stood at the window, watching lights flicker across the water. Dorian's reflection appeared behind her in the glass, and the air between them crackled with the same electricity that had been building since that moment in the bathroom. "Still processing the warehouse?" he asked, voice low. "Processing you," she corrected, turning to face him. "All of you!" His eyes darkened as she stepped closer. The pretense of distance had already crumbled. Now the magnetic pull between them was impossible to resist. "Tessa." Her name was both warning and prayer on his lips. She reached up, fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. "I'm not running." That was all it took. His control snapped like a wire under tension. His mouth found hers, hungry and demanding, yet still somehow gentle. She melted into him, fingers curling into his shirt as his hands spanned her waist. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against her lips. "No." The kiss deepened, years of longing and memory crashing together. His hands slid lower, lifting her easily. Her legs wrapped around his waist as he carried her to the bed, laying her down with careful reverence that contrasted sharply with the heat in his eyes. "I've thought about this since that night," he admitted, trailing kisses down her throat. "About you." She arched into his touch. "Show me." Clothes fell away under urgent hands. Each touch was electric, setting nerve endings alight. He worshipped her body with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, drawing gasps and sighs from her lips. His scars told stories under her fingertips. Prison marks, bullet wounds, the history of violence written on his skin. But his touch remained exquisitely gentle, even as passion built between them. When he finally joined their bodies, the connection was overwhelming. He moved with controlled power, watching her face like she was something precious. She matched his rhythm. Nails, scoring his back as pleasure coiled tighter. "Mine!" he growled against her throat. "Say it!" "Yours!" she gasped. "I'm yours!" Release crashed over them in waves, leaving them tangled in sheets in each other. He gathered her close, pressing kisses to her shoulder as their heartbeats slowly steadied. The digital clock read 10:30 p.m. when Dorian finally spoke, his voice rough. "I need you to understand my plan." She traced patterns on his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart. "Tell me." "Corsini's using the museum to launder money. We'll expose the pipeline, cut off his revenue streams." His fingers combed through her hair. "The volatile parts of his empire will fold without funding, but you..." He tilted her chin up. "I'm establishing a clean foundation in your name. Something legitimate, untouched by your father's ledgers." "My father," she frowned. "What did he do?" "He kept records. Dangerous ones, but I'll make sure his mistakes don't touch your future. His expression softened. You'll have choices, Tessa. Clean ones. The protected line buzzed at 10:42 p.m., interrupting the moment. Dorian reached for the phone, muscles tensing as he recognized the caller. Detective Ortiz, he answered, putting it on speaker. We've got problems. Ortiz's voice was clipped. Someone's framing Ms. Hart. Doctored transfers, backdated paperwork. They're building a money laundering case against her. Tessa's blood ran cold. Dorian's arm tightened around her. How bad? He demanded. Bad enough to stick if we don't move fast. Get me your logs, all of them. We need to prove tampering. On it. Dorian was already reaching for his laptop. Stay close, detective. The call ended at 10:50 p.m. Tessa scrambled for her own computer, pulling up her Restoration Labs accounts with trembling fingers. The transactions loaded, and her heart stopped. There it was, a perfect trail of falsified transfers, each one pointing directly at her. Someone had been busy while she'd been under Dorian's protection, carefully constructing her downfall. Dorian. Her voice shook. Look at this. He leaned over her shoulder, jaw clenching as he scanned the screen. The fabricated evidence was elegant, professional. Someone wanted her to take the fall, and they'd done their homework. The city continued its nighttime hum below, oblivious to the noose tightening around her neck. But in the loft, with evidence mounting against her and Dorian's protective anger radiating like heat, Tessa felt the walls closing in. The sheets still smelled like their lovemaking, a cruel contrast to the clinical numbers condemning her on the screen. She'd given herself to him completely tonight, and now someone was trying to destroy everything. Dorian's phone lit up with incoming logs, data streaming in from his various enterprises. He worked with focused intensity, cross-referencing timestamps and transfers while keeping constant contact with her, a hand on her knee, fingers brushing her shoulder, small touches that grounded them both. We'll fix this, he promised, voice hard with certainty. No one touches what's mine. The possessive declaration sent a shiver down her spine, reminding her of their passionate coupling just hours before. Even with danger closing in, she couldn't regret giving in to the attraction between them. That connection felt like the only solid thing in a world suddenly full of shadows. The clock's red numbers glowed accusingly as more doctored transactions appeared. Someone had been thorough, patient, building this trap piece by piece, while waiting for the perfect moment to spring it. At 11:05 p.m., Tessa's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard while Dorian's shoulder pressed warm against hers. Detective Ortiz's voice crackled through the speaker, steady and focused. There's always a digital footprint, Ortiz said, no matter how careful they were. Tessa nodded, diving deeper into the metadata. Her restoration work had taught her patience with tiny details, and now those skills served a different purpose. Each falsified transfer had a signature, a ghost in the machine that... Wait! She sat straighter. These transactions, they're coming from inside the network, someone who had direct access to the loft's system. Dorian's body tensed beside her. When? Her eyes tracked timestamps and connection logs. 3 weeks ago. The device paired briefly, then disappeared. She pulled up more data. But look at this authentication chain. It's running through Piotr's credentials. It's too neat, Ortiz cut in. Like someone wanted you to find this breadcrumb trail. Dorian's face hardened into dangerous lines. He pressed a button on his phone. Bring Piotr to the cold room, now. Tessa's stomach clenched. She'd seen that room earlier, concrete walls, steel door, no windows. A place for hard questions and harder answers. Within minutes, sounds of struggle echoed up the back stairwell. Piotr's voice carried, desperate and confused. Boss, please! I didn't betray you, I swear! Then explain. Dorian's voice could have frozen hell. Helena! She said she needed temporary access for audit records. Piotr's words tumbled out. She handles all the legitimate paperwork, I thought. You thought wrong. Dorian's tone promised consequences. Tessa's hands hovered over her keyboard. Give me time to trace these connections. If Helena's behind this, there might be more. In my world, Dorian cut her off. Hesitation gets people killed. His eyes met hers, ancient and cold. I can't risk you. Vale. Ortiz's voice held warning. Don't go in hot. Helena Ward's got friends in high places. One wrong move could blow everything sky high. Dorian's smile was sharp. That's why Tessa stays upstairs while I have a chat with our lawyer. The club music thumped below, its bass line counting down the minutes until closing. Tessa watched timestamp after timestamp scroll past, each one adding to the picture of betrayal. Helena had played them masterfully, using Piotr's insecurities like puppet strings. "The transfers are too perfect," she muttered, highlighting patterns. "Like someone with legal training constructed them to withstand scrutiny." "That's Helena's signature," Dorian agreed. "Everything legitimate on the surface, poison underneath." Ortiz sighed through the speaker. "I've seen her work before. She builds cases like architectural models, every angle considered, every weakness accounted for." The clock crept toward midnight as they dug deeper. Tessa found more breadcrumbs, deleted emails, scheduler fragments, careful traces of Helena constructing her trap piece by piece. At 12:15 a.m., the music downstairs finally died. The last patrons filtered out into the night, leaving behind empty glasses and stale air. Dorian stood, straightening his cuffs. "Time to talk to our lawyer." His voice was desert dry. Tessa grabbed his wrist. "Be careful! She's dangerous!" His eyes softened, just for her. "So am I." He pressed a kiss to her palm. "Stay up here. Whatever happens down there." "We'll either clear our path or destroy everything," she finished. He nodded once, then headed for the stairs. Tessa watched him descend, his shoulders set with lethal purpose. Through the floor, she could almost see Helena in her glass-walled office, surrounded by law degrees and calculated respectability. The clock hit 12:20 a.m. Tessa paced the loft, her bare feet silent on hardwood. The laptop screen still glowed with evidence of Helena's betrayal. Outside, the city sparkled innocently, unaware of the powder keg about to ignite below. She touched her lips, remembering their passionate connection just hours ago. How quickly things had shifted from pleasure to danger. But wasn't that Dorian's world? Beauty and violence, tenderness and terror, all wound together like the double helix of his DNA. The security feeds showed Helena at her desk, perfectly composed in cream silk and pearls. She looked more like a corporate CEO than someone who could destroy lives with a few keystrokes. But Tessa knew better now. She'd seen how power wore many masks. Piotr's voice still echoed in her head, thick with fear and confusion. He'd been a tool, nothing more. A weak link Helena had exploited with surgical precision. Now he sat in the cold room, probably wondering how his world had collapsed so completely. Tessa's fingers traced the edge of her laptop, feeling the warmth of its processors, working to uncover more truth. She'd thought art restoration was about preserving beauty, but lately it felt like archaeology, digging through layers of deception to find what was real. The security cameras showed Dorian reaching the bottom of the stairs. His movements were controlled, unhurried, a predator with all the time in the world. Helena looked up from her desk, her perfect smile never wavering. Tessa held her breath, watching the silent tableau unfold on the security feed. Two powers about to collide. Helena's calculated legitimacy versus Dorian's raw authority. Whatever happened in that glass office would ripple through all their lives. She glanced at her phone. Ortiz had gone quiet, but she knew he was watching too, ready to move if things went sideways. The detective played his own dangerous game, balancing law and justice on a knife's edge. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the glass office below. Tessa's heart pounded as she watched Dorian close Helena's door. The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. The text message lit up Tessa's phone at 12:40 a.m. "Meet me at Pier 17 for your own legal safety. Come alone or evidence goes public. Helena." Tessa's thumb hovered over the screen. Through the loft's floor, raised voices still carried from Helena's office. Dorian's controlled anger versus Helena's measured replies. The argument had stretched for 20 minutes with no resolution. She shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed danger. But if Helena really had evidence to clear her name? Tessa grabbed her coat, phone, and keycard. The service elevator opened silently onto the private alley where a black sedan idled, its engine a soft purr. The driver held the door with a practiced smile. "Ms. Ward sent me," he said smoothly. The leather seats were cool against her legs as she slid in. Streetlights strobed across the windows while they wound through empty roads toward the waterfront. Salt air leaked through the ventilation system, growing stronger as they neared the pier. Her phone showed 12:55 a.m. No messages from Dorian. He was probably still trying to extract answers from Helena, who wasn't even in her office anymore. Guilt gnawed at Tessa's stomach. The sedan stopped at 1 a.m. sharp. Through the windshield, Helena's cream suit glowed like a beacon under the pier lights. She stood near the rail, perfectly poised, despite the hour, pearl earrings catching the glow of security lamps. "Tessa, darling." Helena's smile was warm as she air-kissed Tessa's cheeks. "I'm so sorry for the cloak and dagger routine, but we needed privacy." "Why here? Why now?" Because I can help you. Helena's voice held genuine concern. The evidence against you is damning, but I can make it disappear, if you're willing to help yourself. Wind off the water pulled at Tessa's hair. Waves slapped against the pier pylons below, a steady rhythm like a ticking clock. What do you want? A simple statement. Helena produced a tablet. Declaring that Dorian Vale used coercion and threats to isolate you, that he manipulated you into compromising positions for his own agenda. Tessa's throat went dry. That's not true, isn't it? Helena's smile sharpened. A powerful man swooping in to protect a vulnerable young woman? Classic predator behavior. You don't know anything about us. Oh, but I do. Helena's mask slipped, revealing something cold beneath. I know everything about the great Dorian Vale, including who really holds his leash. The wind picked up, carrying diesel fumes from a passing boat. Helena's perfect hair didn't move. Benedetto Corsini sends his regards, she continued. He's quite interested in you, actually. The girl who made the monster feel human. Ice slid down Tessa's spine. You work for Corsini. Smart girl. Helena's laugh was like breaking glass. Poor Piotr was so eager to help when I mentioned career advancement. His login credentials were very useful. She pulled out a burner phone, thumbing through photos. But these are my masterpiece. The images made Tessa's stomach lurch. Long lens shots from that rainy night 15 years ago, her 8-year-old self, Dorian's bloodied figure, the moment twisted into something sick and predatory. You see how this looks? Helena's voice dripped false sympathy. The press will eat it alive, the police will have questions, and Dorian's carefully built empire will crumble. Tessa's faith wavered. The photos painted an ugly picture, frame by calculated frame. Tires screeched behind them. A black SUV burst onto the pier, men in tactical gear pouring out. Before Tessa could scream, strong hands grabbed her arms. Helena stepped back untouched, her smile never faltering. Don't fight, she advised, as one man pressed a cloth over Tessa's face. It only makes the chloroform work faster. The world began to blur. Salt air mixed with chemical sweetness. Tessa's legs buckled as darkness crept in from the edges. Her last clear thought cut through the fog. Wherever they took her next would be defensible, a place where Dorian could mount a short siege. She just had to stay alive until then. The pier lights smeared into streaks. Helena's voice came from far away. Load her up. Corsini's waiting. Then nothing but chemical darkness and the taste of salt on her tongue. The sedan driver stood forgotten by his car, checking his watch. At the pier's edge, Helena straightened her pearls, the burner phone already wiped and dropping into the harbor's black waters. Wind rifled through discarded papers, sending them skittering across wet concrete like pale ghosts. Security cameras blinked their red eyes, recording everything and nothing. Somewhere in the city, Dorian Vale argued with an empty office, unaware his weakness had just been boxed and shipped to his greatest enemy. The SUV's tires left rubber marks on the pier. Its tail lights disappeared into the maze of warehouse streets. The night settled back into false quiet, broken only by waves and distant foghorns. A street cleaner rumbled past, washing away tire marks and footprints. By morning, the pier would show no sign of the exchange, just another patch of concrete in a city full of secrets. The sedan pulled away, its driver already forgetting faces and times. Helena's heels clicked a precise rhythm as she walked to her own waiting car. The pearls at her throat gleamed like tiny moons, perfect and cold as the woman who wore them. Above the pier, clouds scudded across a starless sky. The city's lights reflected off their bellies, creating a false dawn that illuminated nothing. The true dawn was hours away, and in those hours, anything could happen. The harbor water lapped at the pylons, swallowing the burner phone's evidence in its depths. Fish would find new homes in its circuits while Helena's carefully constructed trap sprang shut around its prey. The night held its breath, waiting to see what the coming hours would bring. Somewhere in the city's maze, an SUV carried its unconscious cargo toward a fortress made for siege. The game pieces were in motion. The board was set. Pain throbbed at Tessa's temples as consciousness crept back. The first thing she noticed was the musty air, thick with dust and the sickly sweet decay of old flowers. Her wrists burned against rough rope, bound tight to a wooden chair that creaked with each breath. 1:40 a.m. glowed from a digital display near the altar. Through blurry vision, she made out the vaulted ceiling of what had to be a chapel. Moonlight filtered weakly through taped-over stained glass, casting strange shadows across worn pews. Something glinted under the nearest bench. Tessa's heart stuttered as she recognized the distinctive shape of shaped charges, wires snaking between them like black veins. A red light blinked steadily from a camera mounted near the crucifix. "Ah, our guest is awake," the voice crackled through hidden speakers, cultured and cruel. "Welcome, Ms. Hart. I apologize for the dramatic arrangements, but some conversations require insurance." "Benedetto sends his compliments," Helena said from somewhere to her left. Tessa turned to find the lawyer standing perfectly composed, as if this were just another business meeting. In her manicured hand, she held what could only be a detonator. "What do you want?" Tessa's voice came out rougher than intended. The speaker system carried a dry chuckle. "Direct. I appreciate that. What I want is simple. Dorian Vale's empire, signed over cleanly, along with his public confession regarding your relationship. There's nothing to confess. No, a grown man grooming a child, making her promises, then conveniently reappearing when she's of age? The press will draw their own conclusions." A screen flickered to life near the altar. Tessa's breath caught at the sight of Dorian, looking haunted under harsh fluorescent lights. He sat at a conference table, Detective Ortiz standing nearby. His papers were pushed across the surface. "Sign them all, Mr. Vale," Corsini's voice commanded. "Every property deed, every contract, every shell company, and then we'll discuss your statement about Ms. Hart." Dorian's pen moved mechanically across the pages. His usual fluid grace was gone, replaced by rigid control. When he glanced up at the camera, his eyes were hollow with barely contained rage. Behind him, Ortiz's expression remained professional, but his lips moved slightly. "Stall them." Tessa forced herself to breathe slowly, channeling the focus she used during delicate restorations. The rope around her right wrist had a slight give where it crossed a knot. If she could work it gradually. "You won't get away with this," she said, buying time. "Someone will notice." "Notice what?" Helena interrupted smoothly. "A legitimate business transaction, all perfectly documented and witnessed by law enforcement." She gestured to the screen where Ortiz stood. "Even if someone suspected something, who would risk triggering these charges to investigate?" The detonator gleamed as she adjusted her grip. "Besides, once Mr. Vale's confession hits the news, no one will look past the scandal. His empire will crumble, his reputation destroyed, and you, my dear, will be painted as either victim or accomplice, whichever serves our purposes better." On screen, Dorian signed another document, his jaw clenched. Tessa could see the cost of each signature in the tension of his shoulders, the whiteness of his knuckles around the pen. "You underestimate him," Tessa said quietly. Helena's laugh held no warmth. "No, you overestimate his options. He's trading everything he built to keep you alive. Love makes men stupid." The rope gave slightly as Tessa worked her wrist. She kept her voice steady. "And what makes women betray their clients? Money? Power?" "Necessity." Helena's smile tightened. "In this world, you either serve power or wield it. I made my choice." The screen showed Dorian standing, straightening his jacket. Corsini's voice oozed satisfaction. "Excellent. Now, about that confession." "I'll deliver it in person." Dorian's tone could have frozen flame. "Those were the terms." A pause crackled through the speakers. "Very well, you know the consequences if you deviate from the script." The chapel's heavy doors groaned. Tessa's heart hammered as Dorian stepped through alone, his hands held visible, jacket open to show he was unarmed. His eyes found hers immediately, burning with the same intensity as that long-ago night in the alley. In that look was every promise he'd ever made her, every unspoken vow, every moment of gentleness reserved only for her. It said, "I will burn cities to keep you safe." Helena shifted, detonator ready. "That's far enough." From somewhere in the distance, sirens began to rise, faint but growing closer. Back up, Tessa realized, positioning themselves carefully to avoid triggering the explosives. The night wasn't over yet. Dust motes danced in the weak moonlight filtering through the covered windows. The chapel's air grew heavier with tension, weighted by unspoken threats and calculations. The digital display blinked to 2:05 a.m., marking each second that balance between destruction and salvation. Old flower petals crumbled on the altar, their decay a counterpoint to the sharp chemical smell of explosives. The camera's red eye watched unblinking as the scene held its breath, a tableau of power, betrayal, and desperate love. Trapped in this desecrated sanctuary, The sirens drew no closer, maintaining their distance like circling wolves. Helena's perfect posture never wavered, the detonator steady in her grip, and Dorian stood motionless, his gaze locked with Tessa's across the charged space between them, his presence alone a defiance of everything their enemies believed about weakness and control. The rope bit into Tessa's wrist as she tested the loosening knot. Her fingers tingled with returning circulation. The wooden chair creaked softly beneath her, its aged joints as unsteady as the fragile piece holding the room in check. Through the taped windows, city lights painted false halos on the covered glass. The chapel's shadows deepened in corners where ancient prayers once echoed, now replaced by the soft, electronic hum of demolition charges and surveillance equipment. The chapel's stained glass cast eerie blue shadows across the floor at 2:07 a.m., distorting everyone's features into underwater masks. Corsini's voice droned through the speakers, savoring his apparent victory. "You see, Vale, this is what happens when men like you forget their place, when they let sentiment cloud their judgment." The audio crackled with static. "Now, about that confession." Tessa's fingers worked steadily at the rope, remembering Dorian's lesson from what felt like years ago, but was only yesterday. His voice echoed in her memory. Grip escapes rely on creating space. Sometimes that means sacrificing comfort for freedom. She met his eyes across the chapel, saw the millisecond tightening of his jaw that told her he recognized her intent. The ropes weren't the problem, the knots were amateur, but her thumb would need to dislocate to slip free. Helena paced with measured steps, detonator held loosely but ready. "Let's get this done quickly. I have other appointments." Tessa took a deep breath, remembering Dorian's hands guiding hers through the motion. "Quick and dirty," he'd said. "Pain is temporary. Being trapped is worse." She twisted her hand sharply, forcing her thumb against its joint. The pop of dislocation brought tears to her eyes and a breathy cry to her lips. Perfect cover for the way she was already sliding her hand free. Helena glanced over, smirking at what she assumed was fear. "Don't worry, dear, this will all be over soon." Tessa didn't hesitate. The moment her hand cleared the rope, she kicked out hard, catching the detonator and sending it skittering under the nearest pew. The sound it made against the worn wood was almost musical. Helena's eyes widened in shock. "What?" That was all she managed before Dorian erupted into motion. He moved like a gathering storm, all controlled violence and lethal grace. 2 heartbeats, 2 muted gunshots, suppressed weapons appearing in his hands as if conjured. Helena went down with a surprised grunt, red blooming across her expensive blouse. The speaker relay exploded in a shower of sparks as Dorian's second shot tore through its casing, cutting off Corsini's shout of rage. Small secondary charges popped along the far wall, backup detonators poorly wired. They showered the chapel with grit and plaster dust, a strange gray snow falling in the blue-tinted darkness. Dorian reached Tessa in 3 long strides, shielding her body with his as he dragged her behind the altar's solid marble bulk. His hands were gentle despite their speed as he cut through her remaining bonds. "Status," he demanded softly, checking her over for injuries. "Dislocated thumb, otherwise fine." Tessa's voice shook less than she expected. "Helena?" "Alive. Shoulder hit through and through." He pulled her closer, one arm wrapped protectively around her while his other hand kept his weapon trained on the chapel's entrance. Corsini's feed. As if in answer, the camera's red light stuttered and died, the live feed dissolving into static. Distant shouting filtered through the walls, organized professional voices calling positions and coordinates. At 2:12 a.m., the chapel doors burst inward. Detective Ortiz led the tactical team's entry, their movements precise and practiced. They secured Helena first, then swept the building's perimeter, calling out, "Clear!" in crisp succession. "EMTs are 2 minutes out," Ortiz reported, holstering his weapon. "Evidence team, right behind them. You two, okay?" Tessa nodded, still pressed against Dorian's side. She could feel his heart hammering where their bodies connected, belying his outward calm. "Here." Ortiz tossed a small medical kit their way. "For the thumb. Try not to touch anything else. We'll need prints from the detonator and the ropes." The chapel filled with controlled chaos as more personnel arrived. Cameras flashed, recording the scene. Someone set up bright work lights that chased away the blue shadows, making everything stark and real. Dorian's hands were steady as he helped Tessa reset her thumb, but his voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You said you'd marry me when you grew up." The words hung between them, heavy with 15 years of waiting, of choices made and paths taken that led them right back to each other. Tessa looked up at him, saw past the dangerous facade to the man who had kept a child's pink bandage, who had built an empire but saved his gentleness for her. Her good hand rose to cup his cheek, thumb brushing against the tension in his jaw. Despite the pain in her other hand, despite the chaos around them, despite everything that had happened, she felt absolutely certain as she answered, "I grew up." The simple words carried the weight of a vow, one made not in childhood innocence, but in full knowledge of who and what he was, of who they could be together. Around them, the tactical team secured evidence and took preliminary statements. Helena was loaded onto a stretcher, handcuffed despite her injury. The bomb squad carefully dismantled the remaining charges, their movements deliberate and precise. Ortiz coordinated, with other agencies arriving on scene, his voice carrying across the chapel as he directed resources and personnel. Evidence markers dotted the floor like yellow plastic stars, numbering each piece of the night's violence for future prosecution. Emergency lights painted everything in rotating red and blue, a rhythmic pulse that matched the fading adrenaline in Tessa's veins. Her reset thumb throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a reminder of how close they'd come to a very different ending. The chapel slowly transformed from a place of danger to a processed crime scene, but Dorian's arm remained steady around her, his body between her and the door, still protecting, still claiming, still choosing her above all else. Sunlight danced across the harbor, painting the water in molten gold. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their calls carrying on the salt-tinged breeze that rustled the white linen draping the rooftop terrace. The city stretched out below, its afternoon rhythms softened by height and distance. A discreet notice in that morning's paper had announced the final resolution. Helena Ward, prominent attorney, faced multiple charges for financial crimes and conspiracy. The article detailed her role in an elaborate money laundering scheme through the city's cultural institutions, carefully omitting certain names while preserving the essential truth. Detective Ortiz's measured quotes provided just enough information to satisfy public interest without exposing sensitive details. Tessa stood at the terrace's edge, watching boats cut white paths through the harbor. Her father's ledgers and Helena's seized phones had unraveled everything. The laundered donations, the false transfers, the careful web of lies designed to trap both her and Dorian. Now those same records were sealed in evidence boxes, their poison defanged and contained. The past 3 weeks had transformed the city's underworld. Dorian had moved like a surgeon, excising the most corrupted operations while stabilizing what remained. He'd closed the worst ventures, redirected others, and built something cleaner from the foundations up. The territory wars that had threatened to erupt after Corsini's arrest had been settled through careful negotiation rather than bloodshed. And true to his word, he had established the Heart Conservation Foundation with an endowment that would fund art restoration projects for decades. Tessa maintained full control, her professional reputation not just preserved, but enhanced by her public role as a patron of the arts. Now, as afternoon mellowed toward evening, the rooftop had been transformed. White chairs formed neat rows, leading to a simple arch draped in flowing fabric. Flowers in cream and blush pink spilled from elegant arrangements, their subtle fragrance mixing with the ocean air. The alley portrait hung centered behind the arch, no longer a reminder of darkness, but a marker of where their path began. Small groups of guests gathered below, their voices carrying up as they were guided to the private elevator. Dorian's most trusted captains, a handful of carefully chosen business associates, Ortiz representing law enforcement's delicate detente, and the few civilian friends Tessa had insisted on including. An intimate gathering for a union that would reshape the city's power structure. In the preparation suite, Tessa's wedding dress caught the golden light, silk that flowed like water, elegant without ostentation. Her bouquet waited in its crystal vase, white roses and pale pink ranunculus with her childhood ribbon, cleaned and preserved, ready to be tied around the stems. A new length of midnight blue silk lay beside it, destined for Dorian's wrist as her answering token. She could hear Dorian's voice somewhere below, giving final instructions to his security team. Even now, he left nothing to chance. The perimeter was secured, sightlines checked, escape routes confirmed, protection woven seamlessly into celebration. It was simply who he was, this man who killed to keep order but had saved his tenderness for her. The makeup artist added final touches, while the hairstylist adjusted the delicate pins, holding her loose waves in place. In the mirror, Tessa saw herself transformed. Not into someone different, but into a more polished version of who she'd always been. The scared girl from the alley had grown into a woman who could stand beside a dangerous man and match his strength with her own. Sunset painted the sky in deepening shades of rose and gold as guests took their seats. The string quartet began a gentle prelude, their music carrying on the evening breeze. Security teams maintained discreet positions at strategic points, their dark suits blending with the gathering shadows. Dorian waited beneath the arch, powerful and contained in his tailored tuxedo. His public mask was firmly in place, but his eyes softened when they found Tessa. The same look he'd given her in the alley all those years ago. Recognition of something rare and precious in a world of harsh realities. She walked toward him alone, carrying her ribbon-bound bouquet, each step an echo of choices made and remade. The alley portrait watched over them, its darkness transformed by the golden hour light into something almost beautiful. Their witnesses rose, marking her passage, but she saw only Dorian. When she reached him, his hands were steady as they completed their private ritual. He touched the pink ribbon on her bouquet with careful reverence, acknowledging its history. She tied the new silk band around his wrist, a visible symbol of promises kept and renewed. The official words were brief, witnessed but not truly heard by either of them. Their real vows had been written in blood and bullets, in protection freely given and trust hard won. When Dorian spoke his "I do," his voice carried the weight of empire. When Tessa answered with hers, it held the strength of choices made with clear eyes. The sun touched the horizon as Dorian drew her close, his lethal smile gentled, reserved only for her as he murmured, "You're mine. Forever." Tessa's fingers traced the silk at his wrist, her answering smile just as fierce in its certainty. "And you're finally home!" The first fireworks burst over the harbor, painting the gathering darkness in cascading light. Their guests moved toward the reception area, leaving them briefly alone beneath the arch. The city spread out before them, their domain now, for better or worse. They had chosen this path together, eyes open to both its shadows and its possibilities. More fireworks bloomed against the darkening sky, their light reflecting off the water like scattered stars. Music and laughter drifted from the reception, where their separate worlds were cautiously mingling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new territories to navigate, new balances to maintain. But for now they stood together in the space between day and night, between past and future, between the people they had been and the ones they had chosen to become. Their witnesses dispersed, the camera of memory pulled back, leaving them framed against the city lights. Two people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to build something stronger in the light.